How do you explain autism for parents who are hearing it for the first time?
So being in Global Autism Convention 2026, I think we've been talking about this for a couple of days. So as we're talking, it's on the spectrum, it is possibly about neurodiversity. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder where there is a social and communication deficit associated with some repetitive stereotypic behaviors, some sensory issues, and all this causing difficulty in adapting to the immediate environment in which the child is growing.
What is the biggest misunderstanding which people have or the country has with respect to child psychiatrists? Because normally psychiatrist is referred to someone who is having some behavioral challenges, but people say that as a child you should not take the child to a child psychiatrist. How do you break this myth?
Psychiatry itself has a stigma, and definitely child and adolescent psychiatry, because no one is comfortable to bring their child to a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I feel this discomfort which people have needs to be addressed, because it is not wrong in getting your child to a child and adolescent psychiatrist.
So at what point parents should come to a child psychiatrist?
I would say that in a country like India, where there are very few trained child and adolescent psychiatrists, definitely for a child who's having school refusal, sleep problems, ADHD, behavioral issues, definitely child and adolescent psychiatrists are not the first port of call.
Why do parents get scared when someone refers them to a psychiatrist?
They feel the medications we start, the children get hooked onto, they're very drowsy, they might have a lot of side effects like drooling. I don't deny the fact, yes, some of our medicines do have the side effects. We are not mind readers, we do not sort of predict things for the child. We are just trying to help the child from the knowledge we have. But start low, go slow is again the mantra in child psychiatry.
Today I've got Dr. Satya Raj, and she's one of the leading authorities in the field of psychiatry. And today in this podcast, I am not going to talk about the developmental delays on autism spectrum, but I'm talking about I'm going to cover the entire spectrum right from the childhood till the adolescence. And who else is better than Dr. Satya Raj herself? Better Google her, who she is, because she's one of the most prominent personalities in the field. So thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity at Global Autism Convention 2026 to share my thoughts.
First question which I have for you, doctor, that what exactly does a child psychiatrist do is different from a psychologist or a therapist?
It's a very nice question. To start off from the purview of cases we see. So I see cases, children with emotional and behavioral disorders. So we also see children with neurodevelopmental disorders like, say, developmental delay, intellectual disability, children with ASD and ADHD as well. So if you ask me, and one more thing which I do is I've been trained in infant mental health. So that's something, the first time in India, sort of we've started a clinic called as the Mother Infant Nurture Clinic. So that's something I do as well. So just to tell you the difference between a therapist and a child psychiatrist is we do also prescribe, though I would say that we need to use it very sparingly and very thoughtfully in children. So initially, for the norm or the dictum in child psychiatry is whenever you can treat a child with the least restrictive principle, that is what is the best. So what do I mean by that? If you can treat a child and treat it at home, do that. If you need to only admit a child definitely and treat, then maybe you can do that. And when you're admitting a child, definitely first line, second line, third line management for anything is psychotherapy. In case you're not able to manage and it definitely warrants a medication, yes, I would give medications, but start low, go slow is again the mantra in child psychiatry. So the prescribing thing is possibly something which puts difference between a therapist and a child psychiatrist.
Okay. So again, very basic question. I should have asked it in the first get-go. What made you pick up a topic like psychiatry, and that too in a country like India?
That's a nice, interesting question. So this is from my med school, possibly. I was very interested, and the very, should I say, strange part of it is from day one, I decided I would do child psychiatry, and God willing, I was been able to do that. Wanting to help children with neurodevelopmental disorders and children with emotional and behavioral disorders. Sometimes I feel that is a group which has not been spoken of quite a bit, and that can also cause a significant impairment in children. So be it anxiety in children, be it depressive symptoms in children, or a depressive episode disorder as such, or something as simple as school refusal as well. The school refusal is like a symptom, but there are multiple things which can be underlying that particular symptom. So I feel going into a very detailed history taking and then analyzing and trying to see why the child at this moment is presenting with this particular symptom is the need.
What is the biggest misunderstanding which people have or the country has with respect to child psychiatrists? Because normally psychiatrist is referred to someone who is having some behavioral challenges. But again, these kind of behavioral challenges, normally people say that as a child, you should not take the child to a child psychiatrist. But how do you break this myth?
See, there are two things. On one hand, psychiatry itself has a stigma, and definitely child and adolescent psychiatry, because no one is comfortable to bring their child to a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And I feel this discomfort which people have needs to be addressed, because it is not wrong in getting your child to a child and adolescent psychiatrist, because we are not mind readers. We do not sort of predict things for the child. We are just trying to help the child from the knowledge we have. And I think just like a pediatrician is able to take care of the physical health of a child and adolescent psychiatrist is trained to take care of the mental well-being of the child. I think so this comfort zone needs to come in the thought process of people. I would say that in a country like India, where there are very few trained child and adolescent psychiatrists, definitely for a child who's having school refusal, sleep problems, ADHD, behavioral issues, definitely child and adolescent psychiatrists are not the first port of call. So they obviously go to their pediatrician who they know quite well, and I think that is fine. I think child psychiatrist needs to be where the problems are going to be severe, it is a little long-standing, it has been tried to be managed by a, say, psychologist or a pediatrician, and still there are symptoms which are not remitting. In that case, I think as a specialist care, definitely a referral to a child and adolescent psychiatrist is warranted.
Okay. So, is visiting a psychiatrist only about medicines, or is it more than that?
Definitely not. As I said, that's again a myth associated with you walk out with the medication when you come to a child psychiatrist. As I said, I would definitely say first line, second line, third line psychotherapy for most of my children, unless and until it's a very severe thing and needs a definite indication for medication, we do not prescribe. So definitely, I think this is again one of the issues which needs to be dealt with, and the change or the reform needs to happen in the thought process of people who are looking at it. So definitely, we are not like pill vendors. So please don't take that as a call.
So why do parents get scared when someone refers them to a psychiatrist?
See, as I said, they feel that we might start on medications. And unfortunately, even more, I would say, they feel the medications we start, the children get hooked onto, they're very drowsy, they might have a lot of side effects like drooling. I don't deny the fact, yes, some of our medicines do have the side effects, but in safe hands and when used in a very, very, how should I say, thoughtful manner, and when it is sort of followed through, definitely it doesn't end up in side effects. So I think it's the art of the prescribing clinician which is important, and the skill of the doctor rather than the medication to blame.
Thank you. How do you explain autism for parents who are hearing it for the first time?
So that's a very nice question. So being in Global Autism Convention 2026, I think they've been talking about this for a couple of days. And I feel that autism still, again, one of the words which carries a lot of stigma among parents, because I've come and heard many parents at 4 years come and tell me, having gone doctor shopping, therapist shopping across multiple places, coming and telling me my child has speech delay with ADHD. That's a very sad thing to hear, because I think sometimes people don't want to share the diagnosis with the parent, because it is like sharing a bad news. I feel it needs to be done, but needs to be done in a very sensitive way. So, what is autism? If you were to ask me, it's like so as we're talking, it's on the spectrum. It is possibly about neurodiversity. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder where there is a social and communication deficit associated with some repetitive stereotypic behaviors, some sensory issues, and all this causing difficulty in adapting to the immediate environment in which the child is growing.
So I understand because autism cannot be cured, therefore it is not a disease; it is a disorder, right? And the question which I have for you is that why does autism? I mean, or you can say autism. Why is autism different in every other child? Why does it?
That's a nice question again. So, the term autism spectrum disorder is something I'd like to highlight. The very term spectrum means it's across. So, for example, you take a rainbow spectrum. There are different colors, right? So, though there is an overlap in colors, it's not like there are two ends of the spectrum as well. So, on one hand, in the autism spectrum, you have children who are non-verbal with significant maybe developmental delay as well, and deficits in social and communication, and no verbal output at all. On the other hand, there might be children who have possibly average intelligence or even above average intelligence with a lot of, only social deficits where they're not able to navigate through the increasing demands as they're going through adolescence and early adulthood. So that is why I feel every child with autism is different. So it is not like all children are non-verbal, all children are having social deficits. Everyone has repetitive behaviors. So it's a combination of all these symptoms in varying proportions. That's why it makes every child with autism different. And again, to add to it, obviously, so the management is not like one size fits all. You need to tailor your interventions very specifically to the child's needs. And that is where the success in therapy lies.
I get it. Okay. So when autism is told to parents, they are in a denial mode. How do you address the parents?
I think that's again a very, very sensitive question. So if let's first, I would say
You can give
one
examples
thing
also
as-
because I know the history of you because you
As I
are very
said.
good at giving good examples.
Thanks for that. So I would say one important thing which we need to do is not sympathize with parents, right? So all what they need is not sympathy. What they need is empathy. So understanding and being with them is what they need rather than feeling sorry for them. I know you have a child with ASD. That's really sad to have that. I don't think they want to hear that from us. I just think that they want to be, and their child and their family be accepted in the whole sort of world around them and make it an easier place for them. So I think that's acceptance first needs to come. And if you ask me about the denial, so there are two things to it. When you're breaking a bad news, right? So it needs to be, as I said, done in a very, very sensitive manner. So how do you go about telling a child? So you're seeing a child, you're doing your clinical history, you're doing your assessment, maybe you're doing some diagnostic assessments as well. And of course, you've made your mind that yes, the child has an autism spectrum disorder. But how do you convey it to the parent? So I think that is going to take a couple of sessions where you're able to establish a rapport with the parent and then communicate to them in a way they'll be able to accept. So yes, most of the parents, when told about a diagnosis of ASD, go through something known as grief. So what is grief? So grief is initially there is a denial, right? So this cannot happen to my child. I don't think this is right. This doctor possibly is giving me the wrong diagnosis. Maybe she's not seen many of these children. The next comes like anger. Why do you say my child has this? Why not ADHD? So then there comes that arguing mode, getting more angry, irritable with the physician. And then coming on to maybe bargaining. Maybe this is not that doctor. Should we reassess? This was not a good day for my child. Maybe he would do much better in a tomorrow's assessment if you give him some time. So we've had parents come and tell us. So I think going at the family space, giving them the adequate time to accept work through, process the diagnosis is what we need to do.
Right.
And stand by them in the process to support them. So initially starting, as I said, with denial, then some anger, bargaining, finally comes acceptance. So it does take a time. It is a process. And all we need to do as clinicians is be there to support them through the process with empathy and not sympathy.
Okay, very nice. So one thing which I have realized that there are nuclear families, there are joint families. So I'm sure that you have worked with both the sides of
Yeah.
families. Where have you seen a very rapid progress, and where have you seen that there has been delayed, or despite of knowing about all the facts and figures, there are still being the milestone, or you can say the progress at which rate as per your evaluation did not happen. So what
See,
is your take?
that's again, it's a double-edged sword. Let me put it that way. The reason is, yes, with more nuclear families, what happens is both parents are working. The amount of quality time a parent is spending with the child or the infant and the toddler is decreasing significantly. So they are left with gadgets for quite some time. They do not have the initial social stimulation, which needs to happen, and it is very essential for the adequate developmental trajectory to go on very smoothly. So that is one pitfall, I would say. But having said that, having grandparents with you or an extended family where there is an uncle, aunt, I think that's the strength of our culture here in India. And I think there is no mother, there is no father around, there's always some auntie or some uncle who will come and play with the child. So I will say that gives a lot of stimulation for the child. So, and they would always be someone to come and tell us, because they have the years of experience which cannot be sort of substituted by any knowledge. So they would say like, something is wrong. You guys started speaking early. He's not making eye contact. Why is he not coming when I call him? So there is always an auntie or an uncle or a grandparent who'd step in and tell us that maybe you must go check it out, right? So in these cases, they obviously come to us a little earlier.
Right.
And when there is a lot of social support, their seeking help is early. And even the intervention to facilitate the process of treatment becomes easier when there is one person from the extended family who can step in and support. So the perceived social support is something which is very important in neurodevelopmental disorders, both in early diagnosis, early identification, and in treatment. I think that plays a very, very pivotal role.
How early is a good intervention?
I would say like we screen now at even now. WHO says that IAP and WHO say that screen at 15 months, 18 months as well. So as early as that. So, and as early as you're able to catch them and you intervene, better the prognosis. So definitely yes. The other thing I'd like to add is the double-edged sword I was talking about. Sometimes grandparents, I think, can also play the devil's role, devil's advocate, where they're like, your father spoke only at 6. Now he is fine. I don't think you must get worried. That uncle spoke only at this time. He is very restless. He's so active. That's all. Not that he is not restless. His brain is working so fast. So in some cases, they may delay the process of referral also. So I think we always need to take it with a balance in most cases, but I would say an extended family or a grandparent system being there is very useful, and that's the strength of our culture.
Right. Is there a single test for autism to detect?
No. As I said, autism, if you have to make, most of it is like initially we get a very good history, a clinical history being done, and then an assessment. Assessment, you can do like a screening measures initially in case you have any of the red flag signs like lack of eye contact, there is a speech delay, there are some sensory issues, there's restlessness, hyperactivity, there is no shared enjoyment, there is no pointing, and then there is no, how should I say, a lot of repetitive behaviors. When there are a few red flags like this, you can definitely try to do a screening measure earlier rather than later. And then once this is picking up, then definitely you need to go into structured, objective assessments which are diagnostic. So they're called as screening measures and diagnostic measures. Diagnostic measures also, but then you need to be trained in some of these measures to be able to administer them. So most of the measures are usually run by trained clinical psychologists.
So there is something called the transdisciplinary what do you call it? Transdisciplinary approach. Okay. So I think the first at the topmost level is the psychiatrist, then the developmental pediatrician, if I'm not wrong. Am I going in the right way? And then I think the development pediatrician, under the development pediatrician, or maybe the level down under, is the level where the special ed, the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, they all come. Okay.
Say, I would look at it like, say, if you have a child with a neurodevelopmental disorder, there are multiple medical and, how should I say, non-medical specialists who come to play a role.
Right.
So, for example, a child psychiatrist is going to take, so as I said, a child with autism, not that a child with autism will not develop anxiety, will not develop ADHD, will not develop depression. That child can develop as well. So these are the complex cases which usually are dealt by child psychiatrists. But the initial first port of call is usually a pediatrician. So we work hand in hand with pediatricians, developmental pediatricians, sometimes pediatric neurologists as well, in case there is a comorbid seizure disorder, in case there is any other medical thing suggestive of a possible genetic condition. We have even a medical genetics person being involved with us. So that is the multidisciplinary team we talk about usually for the medical input. In addition to that, we have clinical psychologists, we have occupational therapists, we have speech therapists, we have social workers, special educators, vocational rehabilitation providers. So it's like one spectrum of people again who sort of pitch in to do the best for the child.
So one part, for the medical part, I'm clear, but I'm talking about there are so many centers which are getting sprouted every now and then. And sometimes they say that your child has a delay. There's no proper diagnosis done for the child, and the parents come rushing to the pediatrician, DP, or maybe sometimes even whomsoever they've referred that my child doesn't have anything. And because of that, the right kind of diagnosis gets missed out. The person on the other side makes the money out of the parents or maybe dupe him sometimes. And there is a very big confusion here. And that is the reason why the fear is mongering among the parents, because of which they never come to a psychiatrist. And that is the reason I'm asking, why and how can you clear this entire fog?
So I think that's it has to be a work in progress, and I think many people need to put their hands to see this, because there are very, very good centers which do a lot of good work as well. But there are few centers who sort of don't give the best evidence-based medications, right? Or do not give the best evidence-based interventions.
Right.
They talk about megavitamin therapy, they talk about chelation therapy, they talk about casein-free, gluten-free diet. And all these are possibly things which are not evidence-based. So we really need to remember, who do we get this piece of information from? And I would say by default, when you get it from a center, please go back, verify with your pediatrician, verify with your child psychiatrist, who you trust, so that you can vet the real answer, because it's always not good to get misled. And what happens is the golden time is lost.
What is the golden time?
The golden time is as I said, early intervention. So if you go doctor shopping or therapist shopping for, say, the initial first few years of life.
I like the term doctor shopping with therapy.
So what happens? You keep moving on.
Right.
And then finally, at 5, at 6, when you come, not that the child is not going to make gains after that. The child will make gains, but the child would have made much more gains if you had brought them at 2 or 3. So why lose this time period? So that's why I'd like to frame that. Definitely, yes, you can go to a therapy center. That's not something which is wrong, but see that it is evidence-based. Ask them why they're doing and what they're doing, what is the therapy they offer. Definitely go back to your doctor and consult and discuss about it, so that you get your facts right.
Very, very, very well said. One more question. There's something called virtual autism, which is currently in vogue because of the digital screens and all. Is that really exist for real, or is it just something which is a term which is right now trending and a lot of people are?
See, virtual autism was a term which came in because the increased screen time was causing a lot of symptoms which was presenting with exact features like autism. So that is why they call it as virtual autism, because of the screen time and the lack of eye contact, the social and communication delay. These were the symptoms which were typically presenting, right? So as I was telling the other day as well, increased screen time does not cause autism, but some of the symptoms do sort of mimic, worsen, or can perpetuate some of the symptoms an ASD child has. That is why we say no screen time, no screen time, no screen time at all. So they asked me what is the safe amount of time screen can be used by an infant or toddler. It is a no, absolutely zero. So as far as possible, human interaction is what going to be helpful for the child. It's better to sit down, talk to a child and interact with a child rather than giving them a screen and entertaining them.
So again, the carers, or you can say the caregivers or the primary caregiver, typically spends the maximum time leading them to a burnout. Because of that, obviously, you must have seen so many cases. The question which I have for you, while you easily said that you should spend time, what if the only person who spends time is already burning out and it's already losing it? How do you? What are your suggestions for that parent or the primary caregiver?
See, it's a very nice question. Again, as I said, fortunately, still in India, there are a lot of social supports we have. So it is either an extended family or a grandparent who would definitely chip in. And I would say for a parent who has a child with ASD, so your child has the diagnosis and you need to get help. Somehow parents feel that once they get that diagnosis, that's it. Everything is sort of done and nothing better is going to happen. I think we need to take the responsibility to tell them that, hold hands with them and instill hope that things are going to be better with intervention. I think that definitely needs to be done. And the usual paradigm where we explain that when you go on a flight, the first thing they say is, if the cabin pressure is dropping, the oxygen mask will fall. Put the mask on yourself first and then assist someone near. So only if you are well can you take care of your child. Right. So definitely I think all parents need to ensure that they have their time, they have their space, they have their self-care being taken care of, their emotional health and mental health being taken care of. If that is done, the rest of it will fall in place. But if I compromise on that, it's not going to be too late before I decide this is enough, I'm not going to be able to do it. So having that balance and striking that and being open enough to ask for help when you need it.
Do parents take help? Do they ask?
Definitely they do.
Okay.
And I think as clinicians, it's our role. I must not close my eyes because I'm seeing the child. I will see the child only.
Correct.
So the child is always with a family, right? So I must be able to see the context in which the child is and try to help the family as a whole and create support systems for them, create parent groups for them. So I usually say the best thing is a parent support group. So I feel very lonely when I'm the only person, and when my child is given a diagnosis, I feel shattered. But if I'm able to share my thoughts and I know that someone else is also on the same boat as mine and I'm able to share that grief, I think that gives the best support available.
I've got a very mixed feedback for you. So there are parent support groups, and because autism is a spectrum which is like very, very varied. Some child is, I would say, very, very functional, doing very well. The other child is not as functional as the child. So there's a constant comparison. Oh, his child is doing well, and there is a certain level of why with me, and they go back into the same thing because there's a constant comparison even in the parent group. Okay.
So for that, I would say, always take the good things from any place, right? So if one child is doing well, I have the hope that my child someday will be able to reach there. So let me take the positive part of it rather than comparing with that child.
Parents are actually not matured that enough. That is the reason why they need an authority who can guide them or direct them. Even in parents, maybe some of the parents are very strong, some of the parents are not that strong. It's a culmination of different mindsets here. Okay, one person is looking at the growth aspect, the other person is, they're like stuck somewhere. Okay, and that's where stalwarts like you yourself should come into the picture and maybe give some guidance on the right way or the right approach, because I think there are multiple approaches, but the right approach is the hardest to find. It's finding the right approach and considering it is a spectrum, right? some direction is needed there, right?
Yeah, definitely yes. And I feel one thing very positive about the GAC convention 2026 is I see a lot of parents here. And they're able to talk and directly interact with the professionals and get their doubts clarified. And I think this is one good platform where that can be done and we can facilitate that process.
Right. Very, very, very nicely done. So, towards the end, I have one more topic which I wanted to cover, neuroplasticity. Because sometimes you said that there is a golden period and it gets missed out. Then the important. I have a counter to that. There is something about neuroplasticity which I have read that neuroplasticity is possible till the time you're alive. Your brain can change. Okay. A little bit I want to touch upon that topic because there might be parents who have missed the bus already and they think that we are too late. What is the hope for them? I'm talking about neuroplasticity.
That's a nice question. As I said, there is nothing like no change will be there. As I said, at some stages, there is a critical period, something we call as for development of each milestone. Right? So when that critical period, before that you're able to catch and intervene, the benefits are a little more than what you would expect otherwise. But as you said, it's nothing like you come after 6 and sort of the bus is not gone and missed and there's not going to be a change with intervention. I would never say that. There is always hope for making gains, the child gaining more on the social or communication domain, always scope for improvement. So that is the positive note I'd like to end with. So it doesn't matter whether you're say 3, 5 or even 8 or 10 or an adolescent. Definitely when you need help, please get the help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Satya, for taking out and culling out the time for this interview. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions and doubts, you can directly ask on the comment section. And if you want to connect with Dr. Satya, just Google Dr. Satya, you'll find her there. And I'm sure that she will also help you solve your doubts because she's a prominent personality apparently. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much. Thanks.